I hope that any of the complaints people had about this series, about how there wasn't really a direction we were going in, or that there wasn't really a story to follow, I hope those complaints are alleviated after this episode, because we got a ton of information and world building that really helps establish this world even more, and at least gives an idea of what we could be doing in the future. Hello everybody, I am PhenomSage, and welcome back to another Houseki no Kuni, Land of the Lustrous episode review. Today we're going to be talking about episode 4, Soul, Flesh, Bone. Now, before we get into the actual review, I want to say a few things. For one, you know that me and most people who are fans of this series right now are a little underwhelmed with the amount of reception and popularity it's getting just for being so damn good and yet so under-recognized and underappreciated. You'll be happy to know that that is not the case in Japan at all. This series is blowing up in Japan. It is doing amazing. It is consistently at the top or near the top of the ratings in Japan. A few people showed me a chart that showed that it was number 1 in ratings, beating out Love Live Sunshine Season 2, which, if you know, Love Live is huge in Japan, so that is a major feat. So I am just so happy that this series is getting the attention it deserves, at least somewhere. And the fact that it's doing well in Japan is even better for the production, because it means that we might potentially get a Season 2. With these kind of ratings, I wouldn't be surprised if we did. Second, I wanted to make a correction to last episode's review. A lot of people told me this, and I know I screwed up. When Dai is talking to Cinnabar, and Cinnabar just says, "I'll wait for a bit until calling you a liar." Originally, I thought she was talking about Dai, about how she wasn't going to call Daya a liar. But a lot of people told me this, and it's so true. She's definitely talking about Foe's promise to her about finding something that only she can do and not letting her go to the moon. And a lot of you said that is what Cinnabar meant when she said this, that she wasn't going to call Foes a liar for saying that. So that adds a lot of depth to her character, in my opinion. I like that more than what I said, and I'm really interested to see how that dynamic plays out when they eventually meet again. And finally, you might have heard me calling them she before. That is what I'm calling them. End of story. I'm done changing it. This whole deal has been so confusing to me on what I should refer to them. Obviously, they/them would work the best, but that just doesn't flow nearly as well as calling them he or she in a review. But almost every single one of you guys call them she, so I think I'm just going to call them she as well, just so we're on the same page here. I think the benefit of them being genderless is that you can really refer to them however you want. I heard that the author of the manga actually modeled them so that the bottom half was like a girl, but the top half was like a guy. So I feel like you could refer to them equally however you want. So I'm not worried about it too much. It also just clicks in my brain a lot better because they're designed to appear feminine. So that's what I'm doing. Hope you guys don't mind that. But yeah, let's get into this episode. Right away, I just want to get into the meatiest part of this episode, where we get all the world building, all the background on this world, and that is the discussion between Foes and Ventricosis. I think that's how you pronounce it, but I'm just gonna call her King because that's what Foes calls her. During this little trip with Foes and King, where they're walking on the ocean floor trying to take King back to her homeland, they have a very interesting conversation about how King's true form looks like Foes and why that is, and it eventually leads into a discussion about what humanity used to be and what it is now. King says that humanity was split into 3 elements, soul, flesh, and bone, during the 6th waning of the planet, and I hope one of you can tell me what that means. In the anime, they said something about 6 moons, so I know that's what they're referring to, but hopefully one of you guys can explain what exactly happened, if that's not going to be covered later. If it is, then just leave it alone, but if it's not, feel free to tell me in the comments. So we learn that these 3 elements are what made up humanity, and now they're separated into 3 different species. The flesh of humanity became the Admirabilis, which is King's species, where she came from and what she is. What I wonder is this the only species of Admirabilis, or does this encompass all animals that live and die? Is it only sea creatures, or can it refer to land creatures as well. I'm really curious about this one in particular. In which case, all things that die and have mortality, those would be referred to as admirabilis. Which in that case, I would guess that that is Foe's ability, is that she can communicate with all admirabilis, whereas even in this true form of King, I doubt that the gems would be able to understand her. Next, we have the bone of humanity, which we know eventually became the gems. What really struck me about this explanation is that King says that the gems, or what became of the bones, struck a deal with the other species and then went back up to the surface. Is the deal just that they won't bother anybody else, or is there something more to that? Just something interesting that I noted while watching. And finally, we have the soul, and this is where things get interesting. The soul of humanity is what eventually became the Lunarians. But it doesn't stop there. This was presented as speculation in the episode, but it feels like this is the direction they're going in right now. We now know that the Lunarians' true goal is to bring the flesh of humanity with the admirabilis and the bone of humanity with the gems together with them as the soul. And somehow, I don't know how they would go about accomplishing this, but they want these things together to revive humanity, to become human again. And I love this direction. I love that the Lunarians' goal isn't something as shallow as just taking these gems, oh, we're gonna use them as decorations, they're so pretty. Like, there's an actual reason for getting these things together, and I love that. It does raise some questions though. How do they plan on bringing us together and creating human life again? And if they did want that, why would they carelessly shoot fragments of gems that they had collected, which we saw in the first episode, for attacking the gems? You would think that that would be a precious resource that they need to revive humanity. Maybe it's that they can only revive humanity once they have all of them, so that they're just putting everything into that. I really don't know, but I really like this direction. Like I said, this is a really cool way to take the story and take the overarching plot. Something I asked myself while this was all going on, and then later Foes asked herself, is the revival of humanity even a bad thing? Like, isn't this a good thing to bring everything together again? And King just says, I don't know. I love that there's this gray area here where we don't even know if what the Lunarians are doing is a bad thing. She does follow up by saying that the Lunarians, by having the soul of humanity, seem to express traits of what humanity used to be. They lust for battle even though they have no enemies, and they are never satisfied. In the eyes of the Admirabilis and the Gems, they are the only bad guys here. None of the other two races are hurting anybody or mean any ill harm towards them. So it basically comes down to the Lunarians thinking what they're doing is right and that they need to bring humanity together, even though these other two species are doing just fine on their own. And when they think of it like that, from that perspective, it makes them wonder if bringing back humans is even a good thing at all. What I love most about this interaction though, besides the amazing world building and learning about just everything that used to happen and what's going to happen, is I love the interaction between Foes and King. I want to focus on Foes though. A lot of people have told me that Foes gets crazy development as the story progresses, and I am already starting to see the seeds of that. I'm starting to see where this development could occur, and we're only 4 episodes in, but I feel like Foes has changed from episode 1. Not to a ridiculous degree, but just little subtle changes that feel like our character is growing and developing. During this conversation, you can really see how naive but curious Foes is learning about humanity and learning about her origins. There's a lot of existential talk, there's a lot of morality talk. Foes is technically the youngest of the Gems, which means there's lots of room for her to grow and develop her own thinking and morals and ways of viewing the world, which is why this dialogue and these conversations are so important to her character development. Another aspect that we see about Foes is that she's starting to take more responsibility. For the first 2 episodes, she was kind of relaxed. She made that promise to Cinnabar, but she never really was determined to follow through on it. Whereas in this episode, we see her resolve herself to really find Cinnabar's true purpose, and not just that, but she even takes King through the ocean back to her homeland. Basically, Foes is just stepping up as a character instead of relying on everybody else like she used to. I particularly like the line where Foz contemplates on her promise that she made to Cinnabar, and this is the part where she resolves herself. She says, "No one has ever counted on me, so this is the time where I need to be the hero and find Cinnabar's true purpose." And I love this dynamic. I can't say it enough, but I also love Foz, just Foz alone as a character. Another great aspect about this episode that has been a running trend in this series so far, but was executed even better in this episode, was its comedy and its lighthearted moments interspersed between this drama and this existential talk. This isn't even a comedy, but it has some of the best comedic timing I've ever seen in an anime, to be honest. There's this scene where King gets tossed up into the air and lands on Master Kongo's head, and the anime just freezes and you hear Foz's thoughts, and she's thinking, "Welp, this is the end. Sorry, Cinnabar," or something like that. And it was just so well timed. Seeing the rest of the group laugh at the snail on Master Kongo's head, but trying to hide it was funny. Like, it's just really well integrated into the episode. It doesn't feel forced at all. I did mention existential talk, existential drama, and a lot of you told me before this episode that this is where this show was going, is that they were going to be delving into these more existential themes about life and death, and we get a pretty real conversation between Foz and King, while King is still in her snail form, talking about death, and Foz, being immortal, doesn't know what death is. She's probably heard the word thrown around before, but she doesn't really know what it means. And there's this funny scene where King pretends to die and then comes back and Foz is just like, "I thought you just died," or whatever. Like, it's just some random term, like it doesn't mean anything to her. And I feel like Foz's naivete is going to be the driving force of the characterization in this series. You get her inquiring about what death is and about how sad it seems to be, and you get King saying that it is sad, but it's also what gives life meaning, so it's not all bad. I'm sure these kinds of talks will only continue as we get further into the series, but I really like this little conversation between the two of them. During this conversation, we also learn that King's species were actually taken by the Lunarians. They were all taken from their homeland, and that's why King wants to go back. And the way King talks about her species beautifully ties and foreshadows the ending of this episode, which I will get into in a bit, but I just thought that was really well done, that we're getting this conversation that directly ties into the conclusion and cliffhanger of this episode. As Foz is taking King back to her homeland, we see that King transforms into her true form. She says it's because we're getting closer to her home. I wonder if it has to do with that or if it's the water or whatever, but it's really cool that they have other forms. And my god, the CG jiggle physics. That is Sakuga right there. What's most interesting about King's true form here, other than the fact that you're going to be getting tons of Rule 34 of the next week, is that Foz actually thinks that this form of her is ugly, and I'm just so curious as to why. Eventually Foz comes around and says, "Oh wait, you don't actually look that much different from me." But before, Foz just says, "Wow, you look very unbecoming, like you're so jiggly and weird." Like, I don't know, I just really like that detail that Foz just thinks that form is ugly and doesn't like anything to do with how basically sexual she looks. By the end of the episode, we finally make it to what King says is her homeland, but by the time we're here, Foz is just so tired, so she lays down and says, "Just wake me up when you're done," because it appears that nothing is here. And this is what I was talking about, just perfectly foreshadowed. King says, "You know, I have someone that I care about, just like you care about Cinnabar." She follows by saying, "Forgive me." And in a flash, you look back up at the surface and no sound whatsoever. You see Lunarian arrows just zooming past and eventually hitting Foz as that OST kicks in. And I love that. I love that it's complete silence as the arrows come down. It just adds, I don't know why, but that just adds so much more weight to the scene. But the OST that kicks in is also incredible, and I have to make a note and say that, again, following the trend of every single episode so far, the OST and use of OST in this episode was incredible. I seriously need this full OST in my life right now. It's going to be hard to wait, but I cannot wait to get my hands on it just because of how many amazing tracks I've heard so far, and the fact that every single one has fit each scene so beautifully. And that's where they cliffhang us. Foes is being shot by Lunarian arrows, her legs are already cut off, and honestly, I don't know how she's going to get out of this because she's a day's way from the school, in the middle of the ocean. So yeah, who knows how she's going to get out of this, but from the preview for next episode, it's looking insane. Next episode looks like it could be the best episode of the series so far. I am so looking forward to that. But that's been all from me for this week's episode review of Houseki no Kuni, Land of the Lustrous. Thank you guys so much for watching. This was a bit of a longer review just because there was so much to talk about, so much information given to us. I appreciate the support, the comments, everything. Thank you guys so much for watching. And as always, have a good day.